Welcome back to another episode of Capes and Tights, a comic book and pop culture podcast. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. My co-host, Adam Morissette, is traveling now to visit some family, so he's unable to join us this week on the podcast. But this week, we have podcaster extraordinaire and owner of the website Sketch.com, David Harper, joining us to discuss comic books, the comic book industry, his life as a comic book fan, how he got started with the podcast and the website, all the way from Anchorage, Alaska. We discussed those topics. We also got into, a little bit of basketball as well towards the end there. So if you don't like basketball, at the very end of this episode, mute it for a little bit and then get into more information about David at the end of the episode as well. But we do talk about basketball in this podcast as well because we're both basketball fans. However, most of the episode is talking about comic books and the comic book industry and him and how he got started with Off Panel and Sketch.com. So check out the episode. Enjoy. You can find us on Apple and Spotify and all the podcasting platforms out there, as well as on Instagram and Facebook at Capes and Tights Podcast on those two platforms and at Capes Tights Pod on Twitter. Enjoy, everybody. This is David Harper from Sketch.com and the Off Panel Podcast. Enjoy. Welcome, David. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. I mean, how are you right now? How is life? I mean, we're still within this. I feel like every episode of your podcast that I listen to, you ask the same question at the beginning about how's life and stuff like that. When you thought maybe one of these days you'd actually stop asking that question because life would get somewhat back to normal. We haven't yet. So like, how is life? How is things? How are you coping?
Life is good. It's funny. I had like a really busy week last week. I had two podcasts and one was on Wednesday, one was on Thursday. And normally I don't do multiple podcasts in a week just because I'm like a maniac in terms of research. And I was so stressed out, especially because the Wednesday one was a big one. And I was like, I always tell my wife after I get done with the podcast, I'm like, that was a shitty one. It was just bad. It wasn't good, and then I go and edit it and I'm like listening to it and I come up to my wife and I'm like, it's actually pretty good. And she's like, of course it is. Stop being dumb. But I'm doing well, especially considering the fact that I have now proven to myself that both the podcasts I recorded last week were actually pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I just actually went to my first con of the year this weekend up here in Bangor, Maine. I had a Bangor Comic and Toy Con this past weekend. It was unique and different because, I mean, it's only 6,000 people. So it's not like, some of the bigger cons, obviously. They had it in a mall, basically abandoned mall. I mean, like there's like 4 stores in the entire mall left. So they used like old clothing stores like Deb's and Rue 21 and stuff like that as like the vendors area and the celebrity guest area. And then they used like the corridor area as like artist alley. So all the different artists were in there and it worked out really well. It was the most people I've seen in that mall in a long time. But
I'm not going to lie. I could actually see dead malls being future homes of comic conventions. That makes a lot of sense.
And it was even more perfect and fitting because the main people of this Comic-Con were Ryan O'Halloran, Jeff Anderson, and Jason Mewes, all from Clerks and Mallrats fame. Okay. And so like having Mallrats people from the movie Mallrats at a mall for a Comic-Con like just seemed super fitting.
Yeah.
And so it worked out really well. And my co-host, who is actually traveling today, but Adam and I set up shop at an old GameStop and recorded some podcasts and talked to some live streaming and stuff like that. It was the weirdest, like surreal experience to just be like sitting in a shop I used to buy video games at and recording a podcast.
That's really funny. So you actually, when you go to conventions, you actually get set up sometimes.
So yeah, this one. So I'm friends with the guys. The one of the owners of the Comic-Con is my tattoo artist as well, and I grew up with him and stuff like that. So we're actually moving our studio into the mall. They're renting some stores for a long period of time in the mall, and they have an office space upstairs that we're actually turning into a studio here within the end of the year. From now until the end of the year. So we thought, why not get an opportunity to be there, be set up, hand out some stickers and things like that, and then jump on some guests. And it seemed like it was pretty cool. We didn't have any plans going in. We were just like, let's record and see what happens. And we ended up with Dana Snyder, who does Aqua Teen Hunger Force's milkshake or Master Shake.
Nice.
He came on because of a funny, I mean, a lot of the people have heard of us talking about it already, but he needed to record some voices for a TV show. last minute, like an animated
Oh
TV
my
show,
God.
emergency. And they called him and said, "Hey, we need to record these voices. What can you do? What can you, So it just happened that we had our professional equipment there, and we went into an office space with a lot of crap in it, so they wouldn't like have echo or anything like that. And he recorded like 25 lines for a TV show through the internet, through a website that directly connected to someone in California, and recorded some TV show lines for him. And he was so thankful that he's like, "Oh, I'll jump on the podcast, talk to you guys." And he signed my interface. So I'd always remember that experience and stuff like that. It was just random as hell, but it was awesome.
That is wild, man. That is really, really cool. I love that. I love that you guys just happened to offer the exact thing he needed in that situation. That's really perfect.
It turned out to a weird like line of events. We were live streaming when the guy from the Comic-Con came up and said, "We need you." And I'm like, "We're live on the internet right now. Like, I'm not just walking away." And between Adam and I, my co-host and I'm the one that leads the podcast a lot, and he just fills in. And he was like stuck there by himself now, trying to come up with crap on a live stream. And he's just like, my wife was like, "He needs to learn some jokes just in case that happens again." It did not work out very well. I'm like, it's a story later to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing.
It was unbelievable. And through the rest, we drove him around and so on. So it was really cool. Like a weird thing that I did not expect happening at the Comic-Con. We were just going to talk to some artists and talk other stuff about the Comic-Con, and it ended up turning into us, driving around Dana Snyder and recording his voice.
That's super wild.
Dropping him off his hotel so he could do a Disney Plus live stream question and answer, because he's on the new the Ghost of Maggie McGee on Disney Plus, and so we did like a question and answer on Friday night, and it was a surreal experience. But the con itself was fun. Like
that's great.
I know you've heard on your podcast talking about how whether or not you'll go to cons and you have your press pass for Emerald City and all that, but like it's small enough, and I wore a mask, and a lot of people wear masks, that I felt like safe enough, and we had our own little space because we were in that GameStop. We could like step back and be like, okay, it's a little too many people. We're gonna stand right here and wait for people to pass.
Part of my thing though is it's I don't even know who Emerald City is going to have there. They haven't updated their guest list in a while, and I kind of wonder if they're hedging their bets just in case they have to cancel.
Yeah, and even Judith.
But at the same time, it's really weird.
Too.
They have 3 comic guests, and it's in 2 months.
Wow, are you there?
Yeah. Who?
Sorry, Judith Hogue. She was on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The first, she was April O'Neil on the first TMNT movie, and she just canceled like literally the Friday of it. She's just like, I'm not gonna come.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get the reason why you would want to hedge your bets as a person who's running a con, but it's just given the fact that I might have to cancel for obvious reasons, there might be some cost, because like last year I got all my money back for Emerald City because, well, in the form of a voucher from Alaska Airlines, and my hotel was very understanding. I don't think they'd be so understanding this year, because it's like I'm willfully going into it, and flying down from Alaska is not that cheap. And flying anywhere from Alaska is not that cheap. But anyway, so I've been kind of waiting for like more guests to be announced. I mean, they've only announced for comics Sam Maggs, Donnie Cates, and Ryan Stegman. And I'm like, I like Ryan a lot, but at the same time, I'm not flying like 2,500 miles to see him during a pandemic. I'd love to see more. Anyways,
isn't that technically 1.5 too? Because doesn't Donnie and Ryan kind of count as one? I mean, come on, let's be honest.
Ryan's very tall though. Ryan is very tall. He kind of counts for like 1.5 himself.
But it was fun. We had we didn't have, so this year was supposed to be Kevin Eastman was supposed to come. Kevin Eastman is from Maine, and he obviously created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Maine or in New Hampshire. And so he was supposed to come and be there with Steve Levine and Jim Lawson, some of the original artists from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But with the pandemic and stuff like that, he canceled all of his 2021 cons. And then with the success of his like Last Ronin comic book and stuff, like it seems like what I've been hearing the rumors of is a lot more expensive for next year. So they're like, oh, maybe we'll do them next year. But then it's like, is it worth the cost? Because like, because the cost outweighed the benefit and so on. So we'll see if he comes in April for the next con for them. But it was fun. It was definitely unique in getting back out there and doing something. It's the first thing I've done legitimately with that many people in it in 19-20 months. Like it's literally been the first thing. So it was cool.
I went to Vegas in June. In June. There was no comics there, but there was a lot of gambling and a lot of losing at gambling.
Well, you don't win at Vegas. Come on. They know better than that.
I had brief I have to admit, that was like the 5th time I've been to Vegas in my life. And three of those times has been in it as an adult, and 2 times I've left with more money than I went there with. The other time made up for the time that I made money. The other times I made money. So it's like, I'm going to call myself net even.
Yeah. It wasn't a Dennis Rodman trip to Vegas, was it?
No, God, no. I don't
Okay.
have that kind of money. I'm also not married. Well, I already was married, but I'm not married again.
It's so speaking as we're basketball fans too, so I want to get into some basketball as well at some point because it's fun to talk to someone about basketball. But let's just start. How did you get into comic books in the first place? Like, what was the story behind David in comics?
So Transformers, that was it.
Okay.
I really loved the Transformers when I was a kid. If there was like it was like my drug of choice when I was a child. Basically any form of it I could get, I would take. And I watched I only discovered recently that people don't like the movie, the animated movie Transformers the movie, because I don't know reasons. I loved it when I was a kid. I must have rented that 200 times when I was a kid. I had a whole lot of the toys. I watched the show all the time. I loved it all. And then I don't even know how I got it, but I got the Transformers Marvel comics. And I remember I have it over on my spinner rack over here. Transformers number 41. It was this big fight on the moon between Decepticons and Autobots. And I just remember like seeing all these characters on like this moon fighting simultaneously. And I was like, this is the coolest shit I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, I don't even know how it's possible. And then in the back, they actually had like a little breakdown where you could see each of the Transformers names. And it was amazing. I loved that. I loved not only being able to see this huge scale on a single page, much to the chagrin of whoever the artist was on that issue. I think it was Jose Delbo. But anyways, much to the chagrin of whoever the artist was on that. But I love that. And then also being able to get the information elsewhere. And from there, it was kind of like always a reciprocal relationship between animated shows and comics and trading cards and comics. I love the Marvel Universe trading cards. That definitely hooked me a bit. I loved X-Men the animated series and Batman the animated series, and that hooked me. And then I think the funny thing is the very first comic I actually bought for myself, the very first new one was, I remember it was at a spinner rack at a Safeway in Anchorage, Alaska. I don't even know if you know what Safeway is. It's like a grocery store. And they had, I think it was Uncanny X-Men 294, the first issue, the first part of the Executioner song or event for Marvel. And it has, it was an Executioner song. Shit, what was it? God, I always mix up the damn Marvel or X-Men events that have X's in them because they always like confuse me with that. But it was about Cable shooting Professor X with a gun that has the legacy virus in it. And then it turns out it wasn't actually him. It was his twin brother or twin or clone. It was Strife. And anyways, it was really wild. But the thing about it was it was polybagged with a card in it. And that was my hook. That was the one that got me. And it was Executioner's song. It was that.
Yes.
Anyway,
yes.
So it had a card in there and I wanted it. And then next thing you know, I was reading X-Men comics and I was hooked. And largely I've been reading ever since. I took like a few year gap in college or high school and college because I think that happens with a lot of people. And I got hooked again by Y the Last Man and Fables and The Walking Dead. And I've been reading ever since.
I love how you said the X-Men animating series too. I mean, obviously it wasn't what you got. I just feel like enough people I talk to about comic books, they realize like in a sense, comic books didn't exist before the X-Men animated series. Like that's what they got them into comic books in the first place was like, oh, we watched this animated show on TV. And then I started reading comic books. That to me, and that's what one of the things that got me into it. But I had a bigger gap too. I had a pretty big gap because I thought I was too cool for comic books. It was too nerdy for me. I needed to be one of the cool kids and comic books weren't cool. And so that would happen to me. And I got back in, honestly, not just more recently, but with Secret Wars in 2015. That's really what brought me back. Really a little bit further back than that, a little bit Civil War and Secret Invasion on Marvel's side. I'm glad you said Y the Last Man, though, because it's not your typical superhero. Like the Y Last Man and Walking Dead. Walking Dead is one of my favorite comic books of all time. I love Robert Kirkman's writing and you know, the whole book itself. I've read that multiple times. And I didn't actually get into some of these Image series or independent publishers until probably within the past 2 or 3 years. Like it was Marvel, DC, mostly Marvel for my entire life. Like nothing else existed. And I'm very glad over the past few years that I've been able to actually read some of these outside the box, like not superhero related comic books, because there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would show you my office. Like you can see part of it. I have one small bookcase of Marvel and DC trades, and then I have two same size of just like non-Marvel DC, and then one much larger one of just non-Marvel DC. Then I also have 37 long boxes over there. It's ridiculous. I'm basically, one day my wife is going to come home and I'm going to be crushed to death by my comics, and she'll be like, this is how I thought that this would happen. This is the only
I feel like
way
most
you
comic
could
book
have died.
fans are like, if other people walk in, you'd be like, "Are you a hoarder?"
Yeah,
Like,
but it's
no, this is just
organized. It's
yes.
organized at least. I mean, it's like painfully organized. Although I will say it is very fitting. I just looked over, and the first thing I saw wasn't a comic, but it was a Grimlock toy from when I was a
See?
kid. So bringing it full circle. I mean, I think that the early 90s were like the perfect storm of gateways into comics for a lot of fans, though, because X-Men animated series, Batman animated series, the Marvel Universe trading cards, there was a lot of, and Batman 1989, the Michael Keaton movie. I mean, all of those things were really great ways to hook people. And it's really interesting. I don't know of a lot of things that have been as successful at creating a new generation of readers since then. Walking Dead was very good at it, but I think it was better at creating Walking Dead readers than it was necessarily comic readers.
Yes, and I think there is that gap, and there's that ebbs and flows, and like the X-Men animated series, the Batman animated series, a lot of these things that you mentioned. But then you have the MCU now that does it for more younger crowd that doesn't have, like, I know of people who are fans now of just the Marvel movies because they're so well made that they got into comic books based on watching the movies. So like for me, and being a younger kid, I'm 35, so the X-Men animated show was right in my, wheelhouse at that time. Someone who also was around 10 years old or 8 years old, 7 years old at this time, watching Iron Man kick ass on TV or on the big screen, will also hopefully create a comic book fan out of that person for a long time to come.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting though, because I think even more so, or perhaps at least in a different way, the MCU is a very good replacement for the comics because it's serialized, because there's so much of it. I mean, the funny thing is, I say that in the X-Men, the animated series, that series probably has more actual hours than the MCU combined, because it was like 20 something episodes every year for like X amount of years.
6 years or 5 years?
Yeah,
5 or 6
exactly.
years, yeah.
So, I mean, that's a shit ton of content. And it probably tops what the MCU did, but it feels different because this is so sustained. And I think that's one of the problems. Like, people are always like, oh, why doesn't the MCU create more readers? And I'm like, well, because they have what they want. That is the text to them. And I think that's fine.
It is fine. And you're right about that, because I follow a couple other podcasts too, and they're literally their whole thing is just covering the MCU. Like, they don't talk about anything else but the MCU. And so it's like a replacement to reading comic books or doing other things as well. But yeah, I mean,
I would definitely run out of things to say. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, yes, you're right, absolutely right. It would definitely get to the point where there's too much to say, or not enough to say about what's going on. There's such a bigger world in actual print comic books or web comic books or any of these other comic book worlds. For sure.
After the 5th episode of theorizing when Mephisto's
it's always Mephisto.
Appear, I would probably be like, oh, this is what's that?
It's always Mephisto.
What was that? It's always Mephisto. I mean, Mephisto's everybody. I mean, Mephisto is literally every character in the No Way Home trailer.
Yes. It was unbelievable. But so, I mean, how did you get from comic books, just reading comic books and being a fan, to it, to writing about it in recording a podcast? Like that seems like I mean, not in my world, because that's exactly what I wanted to do, and that's what I did too as well. But like, how do you get from just reading comic books and being a fan to actually writing about it and having a podcast?
So I always wanted to write. I actually went to college for marketing. I got degrees in like human resources and management and in marketing. And I went to business school, but I also got a minor in English. And I took a lot of creative writing classes. I always really enjoyed writing, but then I realized I didn't really need to get a degree to write. It was completely unnecessary. So I might as well get something to pay the bills while I figure out what I want to do while writing. In terms of how I started writing about comics, I was a big, I always think this is like such a funny out of the blue part of my story, but I was a big like pop punk / I don't know, screamo / whatever fan back when I was in college. And I was part of this forum for absolutepunk.net. And it was a website that was just like celebrating this stuff. And on the forum, there was a massive thread called Wednesday is New Comic Book Day. And when I was on there, I was writing a personal blog at the time, and every once in a while I'd write about comics. It was kind of like what we were talking about before we started recording, where people are like, stop writing about or talking about sports on your comic podcast. On that, I always felt like people are like, why are you talking about comics in this blog about yourself? So I, it's that Wednesday's New Comic Book Day thing. It was going for a long time, and this one dude in the thread, Matt Melikoff, was said that he was starting a comic site. He started a comic site called Multiversity Comics, and he was like, does anybody want to write for it? And I was like, yeah, all right. And so I started writing for it, and I was like the third person to join the site, and I wrote for them for like 5 years, and I really enjoyed it. We did really well. We were nominated for an Eisner, I think, in 2014.
Wow.
And we did really well, and they're still doing well. They're a great site. But eventually I was just like, I'd written literally like 3,000 posts over that 5 years. And a lot of it was stuff I didn't really want to write about. Like I was reviewing The Walking Dead, and I was like, writing reviews and just for weekly comics and stuff. And at a certain point, there's only so many different things I can say about Moon Knight. And so I was just like, sorry, Moon Knight, I don't mean to slander you. Mark Spector, you're a legend. But anyways, at a certain point, I was just like, I just want to do something else. So I took a few months off, and I decided I was going to start Sketch in 2015. And I started Off Panel, my podcast, at the same time. And, I did that for a bit. I only did Sketch for a year, and I burned myself out. I took a break from Off Panel for 3 months, and I brought it back. And now I'm on like episode 324, 323, something like that. And anyways, and so I'm still doing that. And I just, the thing about it is when I watch, okay, so this is an unnecessary aside, but it's going to explain myself pretty well, I think. So like I watch a movie, and one of the first things I do after watching the movie, if I liked it, is I will go read the IMDb trivia page, because I like learning about the story behind things. Like I really love just like learning these random things about things I enjoy. So it's like if I watch a movie like I don't know, like The Frighteners. I just watched The Frighteners with my wife, which I really like that. She'd never seen that before. It was the Peter Jackson movie with Michael J. Fox in the 90s, and it was a weird ass like horror movie. And go and read like this random stuff about the filming, about how they were like in New Zealand for like 9 months shooting there, and about how like it was like the long, well, up until that point I'm pretty sure it was the longest film shoot in the history of New Zealand. Then Lord of the Rings came, and they're like, oh, you're basic. Anyways, and that type of stuff really interests me, and comics do the same thing. Like I'm always interested in like the story behind things. Like for example, you mentioned Secret Wars. Like one piece I did this year for Sketched was I put together the oral history of Secret Wars, the 2015 one, and I talked to all the main creative team, the main editors, some people who had done side books for it, like the related to the universe. And I did that over a period of like 4 months, interviewing all these people, and I put together the oral history, and it was really fun doing that. And that's kind of the gist of what I want to do. Is I like to learn about these things I love and these creators who do this amazing work and the people who are involved with the industry, and kind of sketched an Off Panel or just the manifestation of that. And that's just what I do.
And it's great. I mean, I found you listening to the podcast first, then I found sketched.com, but there was something, I think I was Googling like top comic book podcasts to listen to, or comic book podcasts to listen to, or something like that. And someone had brought up Off Panel. And I will say, as a person who does graphic design for a living, I will say the person who did your logo for Off Panel did draw me in, because a lot of times you'll see the little icon, and you're just like, that's someone's half-assed icon for a podcast. Having it actually looked professional and looked well made me click on it and go, okay, I want to listen to this podcast. And then obviously your audio quality and all that stuff is good as well. But yeah, it was one of those things that I was like, I just stumbled upon Off Panel by Googling comic book podcasts, and luckily someone else thought you were good. So that's good.
Yeah, it's tough. There's like so many comic podcasts. It's hard to get through the noise. And also I hate promoting myself. So it's just like, if people find it, that's great. And if they don't, I'm like, whatever. But I will say, shouts to John 2 Hollingsworth. That was a former coworker of mine. I work in an advertising agency, and he's an amazing designer. And he did the logo for Off Panel. And and he was an art director at my, actually I don't remember, he might have been an art director at my office at the time. No, it was after he left, and he was freelancing, and he's like an award-winning designer in Alaska, and honestly an unbelievable designer. So I'm glad to hear that you like the logo.
Yeah, it's excellent, and it's definitely something that, like I said, everything's put together professionally, and you talk. It's awesome. It's a great it's a great podcast to listen to. But also, I agree with you the fact that if someone just finds me, they find you, because like I feel like you're gonna have these conversations anyway, so might as well record them and talk to someone else about them and see if someone else enjoys listening to them, because why not? So if you end up getting to the point where you're like, all of a sudden, I know you're like, you sign online, you're like, oh, Off Panel has 10 listeners this week. You're like, oh, whatever. I enjoyed the podcast. I enjoyed talking to someone, whatever, when you get thousands and thousands of listeners, it's great. But like, if you end up having a podcast one day, your podcast just starts to dive down. You're like, it was still cool to talk to, Ryan Stegman or, Donnie Cates or whatever.
It's never cool to talk to Ryan Stegman.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Ryan's great. He's a Detroit Pistons fan, though. I mean, who likes the Pistons? I'm a Pacers fan. They're like natural enemies. Malice in the Palace. That's that's what we call every time Ryan comes on the podcast. Hilariously, he's actually supposed to come on in a couple weeks. But I will say one of the interesting things about doing an interview podcast is that, in a weird way, and like this isn't a plan, it's just kind of how it works, your guests are kind of your advertisement, if that makes sense. Where it's like, who you have on is going to both inherently dictate it's just going to dictate who will listen to it. Because a lot of times, like I have my constant listeners, the people who will listen to basically every podcast I do. And then there's some people who will only listen because this week I had Matthew Rosenberg on, or previously I had Heidi McDonald on to talk about the industry, or, Jeff Smith came on to talk about Bone or whatever. And it's interesting because it creates a pretty, I have a pretty like narrow band of where my listenership is, but there's sometimes where the spectrum increases or decreases based off of like the familiarity people will have with like a certain guest. And again, I don't really care, because it's like I had one of my good friends on the podcast last year during the pandemic, and during the pandemic, it's still going on. But at the beginning of it, because I did a week of podcasts and I wanted to highlight artists who are in a different space but are kind of operating in a similar fashion, who are used to conventions and everything like that. And it was funny because like I fully expected her to have like the least listens out of anybody, but like she didn't. I think it's partially because she's my friend, and it was really funny listening to her like roast me for an entire hour. But anyway, so it is interesting though, because it's like I don't have to promote it, because sometimes like I've had people email me and tell me like, I discovered it because you had X person on there. I discovered it because you had Y person on there, and now I'm listening to it all the time. And that's the hope, is I do something that's interesting to me, and it produces a result that's interesting to somebody else, and then they stick around. And so far that's been working. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. I have my way of listening. Originally I stumbled upon Off Panel, and I listened to the ones, I like went back and listened to the ones like, oh, I want to listen to that person. I want to listen to that person. I want to listen to that person. Then I stumbled upon some of the ones you have with some friends and some regulars and things like that. Then I found the other ones that have those regulars. And then it got to the point where I'm like, okay, I listened to everyone that I wanted to listen to. Now I'm just going back and like, okay, I guess I'll listen to that one. And it ends up a lot of times turning out to be one of the better episodes that I just happened to skip because I didn't either know the person or at the time care about the person. And you have your likes and dislikes. Like when I saw you had Scotty Young on, I was like, oh my gosh, I love Scotty Young. I have three Scotty Young tattoos
and a print back there.
Yeah, print back there. And so I love his artwork. I love like his writing right now. He's kicking ass writing. But I got pissed off at that episode because he was on like recording like on a Friday or something like that, and it was released on Monday, and he announced on Tuesday that he was like doing I Hate Fairyland again in the Substack thing. And I was like, it was so funny because I listened to it. I'm like, oh, I want to hear some cool stuff about this. And then the next day he announced on his website that he was doing the Substack thing. And I was like, come on, man, you were just on the show. Like 1 week later would have been different.
It's funny though, because it's like, if you listen to him, he asked me, he's like, when is this going to run during the podcast? And I'm like, Monday. And he's like, I can't talk about it. But that's the thing is like, there's sometimes like earlier this year, I had Jerry Duggan on, and we ended up talking in, I want to say March or April. And at that point, when I first reached out to him, I just want to talk to him about Cable Marauders. but we kind of kept punting. But by the time he came on, he was writing X-Men. He was doing Planet Size X-Men. Cable was ending. There's all this different stuff. And it's funny because like you're saying, even a day, if I published that a day later, we could have talked about that I Hate Fairyland stuff and the Substack stuff, and it would have been a completely different conversation. But that's the nature of interviews, is sometimes there's things they can talk about and sometimes there's not. And it's you leave it to the fates sometimes, but it always works out. It's always a fun conversation. It's just certain things are open otherwise.
Yeah, and if you waited, you just never would have that person on. I mean, like, especially someone who's active, someone who's doing things right now. It's like you can't wait for the next thing, because the next thing, when that ends, the next thing's gonna come, and it's gonna be dated at that point. And that's the game. You can't. It's not like you're writing a piece for Sketch.com and you can go in there and add to it, right? If someone, you did an interview with Scotty Young for Sketch.com, and then like a week later you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go in there at the bottom and add a little bit in about the Substack thing. An audio recording that's a podcast is out there and it's listened to, and you're not going to go through and add things to it later on.
No, I definitely would not. That's too much work. Way too much work.
Way too much.
I think it's funny that we have a video element, and my son has decided to persecute me. If I was a vampire, I'd be like extremely dead right now.
Well, now we know you're not.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. Unless I'm sparkling him, it's like a Twilight vampire. I'm actually gonna close my shade though.
Yeah.
I just freaked out Stella J. Anyways.
Do you I know you've had so many people on there. I mean, you list of people that are on there now. Obviously at this point, it's just another guest and so on. But did you have at the beginning some pinch me moments, some moments where like, how did I get this guest to come on? Or I'm really happy to have this person before you. I mean, like I said, obviously now it's to the point where you have enough people on that it's like somewhat not of a surprise. But is there a pinch me moment ever back in the day?
Well, I mean, the difference is I'd been doing it for 5 years before at Multiversity. And so I'd already kind of created, like my first guest was Sean Murphy. My second guest was Declan Shelby. My third guest was John Lehman. So it's like, fairly notable people. And it was because they already knew me, and it makes it easier to book people if they already know you to a degree. And like, so I'd kind of been established as a person who could talk about things in an educated way that didn't really cross into like the usual fan questions. Like, I'm not going to be like, okay, so when is Batman going to die? And they're like, I can't talk about that. I'm like, okay, let's talk about something else you can't talk about. So it was kind of established. I mean, I will say early on, like the first interview that I'd ever booked for Multiversity Comics, we like were euphoric in email, like as euphoric as you can be through email. Because we never had an interview before, and we were like losing our minds. And it's funny because like looking back on it, I'm not going to name the person because this is accidental slander, but it's just like it wasn't a big deal. It was just exciting because we'd never done it before. And at a certain point, it's just it's just, I'm not going to say it's old hat or anything like that, but it's just talking to a person. I always tell people, like, people are like, oh, how do you talk to these people? Like they're, like, are you friends? I've had people ask me if like, are you friends with all of your guests? And I'm like, I don't have that many friends. I've had 323 episodes, man. Like, I haven't met the vast majority of these people. Yeah. It's just I think the key to a good interview is just remembering that these people are people. But anyways, pinch me moment. I would say the most surprising one that I did was I was at New York Comic Con in 2018. I want to say. Time is weird now, and I don't remember. It was either 2018 or 2019. I was going to bed in an Airbnb my wife and I were staying in after an amazing night in of watching a classic New York movie in Hackers. It was amazing. We went out to dinner, come back. It's just like you want to unwind with a New York film, and so you're like, let's watch a movie about hackers hacking the planet. Anyways, and so I get an email from Image's PR person, and she was like, I know you want to talk to Brian K. Vaughan. What do you think about tomorrow? And I was like, fuck. Yeah. Yes. I say yes. And then I was like, I don't know what to talk about. Because like my thing is I put in a lot of research into my interviews, and I don't normally set myself up in a position where I'm going to do a bad interview, because I want to make sure that the person is satisfied with their experience. And so anyway, so I like quickly put together a rough sketch of what I wanted to talk about. And it was a funny position because it was like, Saga was on pause, or Saga is on pause. You know, a lot of his Paper Girls was coming to an end. I think they just announced that it was ending or it was near the end, and you know, a number of things. And so yeah, I got together, and it was funny because like I go to Image's booth and I meet up with Brian, and then we walk to like the press area. And because I'm like a habitual schmoozer, I'd like previously talked to the Reed Pop people about seeing if I could like go into the back area where they do like the panel like press areas, and like just have a private area back there. And I'd kind of befriended some of them in at previous cons, and they let me do it. And so it was funny because I was going through the press area, and I just remember this one guy who does another podcast, Battle the Atom, for Comics XF, Adam Reck, great guy. He tweeted a little bit later, and he was like, at Slice Fried Gold just walked by me with Brian K. Vaughan like it was nothing. And I was just like, inside, it was like a torrent of emotions. And I was like, oh my God, I'm because I've been trying to get Brian for years. I never got him. He's probably my favorite writer. And it was great. We only talked for like 25 minutes, but it was just it was a really good conversation. And he seemed happy with the experience. I didn't ask him dumb questions, it seemed. And I'm going to call that a success. So I would say that's probably as far as a pinch me moment as I've gotten. The closest I've gotten to a Chris Farley show podcast is it's funny because like it's all sliding scale for this stuff, right? Like who is exciting for one person is not exciting for somebody else. But there's this cartoonist named Nate Simpson who does this comic called Non-Player. Its first issue was released in 2011. They've had a total of 2 issues released. I love that comic. I love it. It's amazing. It is unbelievable. Those 2 issues have more ideas in it than like 50 issue runs for other books. I love it so much. I had him on the podcast right as the second issue was coming out, and it was great. And I was just like basically fanboying out about like how great he is. And yeah, so it's funny. Like I would say those 2 are the ones that stand out the most.
That's awesome. I love those stories. Like I said, we talked, about the Dana Snyder thing, and it just happened to be, it worked out the next day, this, that, and the other thing. And it's the same thing. We were not planning to interview Dana Snyder, but it's like the next day he's like, oh yeah, I'll jump on tomorrow. So we're like, same thing. Adam and I are trying to find things to, talk about, making sure. I mean, I'm not a huge animated like comedy show person. Like I watched maybe like 10 episodes of Aqua Teen Hunger Force growing up. So it's like, I didn't really have a big background on it. So, but it was like just talking to him about voice acting and stuff. I was able to find an avenue to talk about and an avenue to head with, and knew some things, how many seasons the show was on and those things. But it's just the pressure. I'm a planner. I mean, I plan things out. I mean, we talked about doing this for a couple of weeks now. It's not like I just texted you or emailed you and was like, can you get on tomorrow? It was like a plan out, schedule out, let's get it put out in place. So yeah, that spur of the moment thing can always throw the pressure on too.
Oh my God. Well, I've actually declined pretty notable interviews just because I can't handle the spur of the moment. The same con, I was offered an interview with Bill Sienkiewicz, and I declined because this is terrible. I've said this on other podcasts, so I can put myself on blast. I've never read Bill Sienkiewicz comics because his art scared me when I was a kid. And it's like ridiculous, but I remember reading New Mutants when I was a kid, and I was just like, this is horrifying. I am out. I'm out. So anyways, yeah, I declined an interview with Bill Sienkiewicz because I'm a coward.
Who was it that you just talked to about that? I just remember listening to a podcast about that. You just said
I don't know. It's come up a number of times.
It might have been Chip Zdarsky. It might have been Chip. Or yeah, I don't know. It was a recent one, I thought, but that's
when
that's
they came
awesome.
on. But yeah. Anyways, it's random.
I mean, I like how you brought up Brian K. Vaughan quickly too. I mean, you watching the show at all? Why the Last Man? Obviously,
no? I have not watched it. No, I mean, the problem is, so I have a day job where I work in an advertising agency, and I have the podcast and I have the site.
Yeah.
And also there's a lot of television out there.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And so I have a really tough time keeping up with everything. Like I also want to play video games. Like I just bought Resident Evil Village and I want to play that, but I haven't played that in like a week. And I haven't watched any of Why Last Man. It's funny. There's like so many comic related things that I haven't watched. I've watched Sweet Tooth. I still watched the Snyder Cut. There's just a lot of stuff I just can't keep up with. So I just don't. I'll get to Why the Last Man eventually.
Yeah, oh yeah. And here's the deal. And we talked about the you mentioned Why the Last Man earlier too. And obviously Vertigo is an imprint of DC, so it isn't like this independent publisher. But I will say that I never had read Why the Last Man until I saw the show coming, and then I went, and now I'm like on issue 21 or 22 of that series as well. So it's It's definitely well written. It's awesome. I love the whole premise behind it. The show is different for sure. I don't want to spoil anything, but the show is they definitely took some liberties on the show that were different than they were in the comic book. Which they also
My
did
thing
in
is
The Walking Dead and all that stuff too. So it's not like
yeah. My thing with the adaptations is it's less about nailing the specifics and more about nailing the spirit. If they get the spirit right, that's all that really matters to me. And I mean, honestly, Why Last Man first launched in like 2003.
Yes.
And the world has changed dramatically since then. If they didn't update it, I think they would have a different problem.
Yes, exactly. But it's definitely well made. It's definitely a show that, you know, is fun to watch. It's on Hulu, and I'm trying to figure out. We're gonna we actually have a guest lined up that I haven't announced yet, but a guest lined up to come on the end of the month from the show. And when we talk to them, I want to ask questions like the show. They were first 3 episodes released on Hulu, but Hulu was also a binging kind of show like place too. And now they're doing the week to week, and I'm wondering if that changed based on like Disney Plus doing that a lot more now and Apple TV Plus and all that stuff. Whether or not they were planning to do the week to week before.
I think I can answer it for you. It's because it's an FX on Hulu show.
Okay,
it's not a Hulu
sense,
show. Yeah, so it's like they're also showing it on TV. Is it the monkey that plays ampersand?
Was that? No, it's not.
Oh, damn. That'd be amazing. It'd be a horrible interview, but I'd be like, I'd be starstruck. Also, I don't even know if it's a real monkey. I don't know if it's a CGI monkey.
That's what we were trying to figure. My wife and I were trying to figure that out too. Like they also don't like in the show, you'll see they don't show the monkey all the time. It's a lot of times it's in the carrying case, and it's like whether or not the CGI budget, if it's a CGI budget, or if it's a real animal. You know how like animals can't be on screen for so many hours and all. They're like, let's cut down the number of hours we can have this actual monkey walking around. So we'll put it in a carrying case that you can't see in it and hear like you just make monkey noises instead of actually seeing it.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, there's too much stuff. It's a lot. It's too much stuff. But that's okay. Yeah, I can't even keep up with the comics I have. You would be shocked by my nights, like my whole comic reading area. It's just a debacle. I'm so far behind.
Well, I came in here and I bought comic books last week and I had them on my desk in here and I went to do something because the Comic-Con this week and I'll go, oh my gosh, I bought comic books last week and there's just a stack of comic books that I forgot I even bought last week. Like, oh,
the nature of a comic fan.
And now they're making it was the 875th legacy of Fantastic Four, so the book was $9.99 and all this other crap they're doing now is annoying. But as we get, I don't want to talk to you forever, but I'm in Maine, you're in Alaska. Okay. They're not exactly the same state, but we have some similarities to the point where we're both in cold states. We have pretty cold winters. They're pretty rural. You mentioned going to specific comic book stores up in Alaska and so on. I have one store that I can go to within a certain distance from me as well. Does it make it difficult growing? Like, you from Alaska? First of all, are you from Alaska from birth?
Yeah, born and raised.
Okay. And so does it make it difficult to be a comic book fan in a more rural state in a collecting capability? Or
I don't think
reading?
so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference is that I didn't know any comic people when I was growing up. I mean, I knew the people who would go to the comic shop, but I didn't have any friends who read comics, and so I was more isolated. And that was I wouldn't say that's a pro or a con. It just was. My comic shop is great. I sass it a lot on my podcast. Actually, like retailers know that I like sass it, and they think it's hilarious. And it's a good shop. I mean, honestly, all things considered, despite my complaints, I'm very lucky as a comic fan to be going there, and they know me, and so I've been going there forever. So I get treated very well. And yeah, I mean, I think Alaska is a great place to grow up as a comic fan. Probably not best as a comic creator because you're so isolated, and a lot of them end up moving for that reason. Most of the ones I know end up moving down to Portland or somewhere with a more robust comic community. But there are creators up here. Like a good pal of mine is Tad Galusha, and he's an active comic artist, and he lives like 20-30 miles away from me, and we get breakfast every once in a while, and good dude. And but yeah, I mean, I don't think Alaska as a comic fan growing up wasn't an issue. It certainly is an issue now because the internet is the great equalizer. Like I can talk to anybody anytime. The biggest problem, to be honest, is time zones. It's like I'm going to talk to an artist in Spain and I'm like, good Lord, what time do I have to get up for this? I'm like, I got to get up to do this podcast at like 6 a.m. Ugh. But anyways, you make it work. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's a pro or a con. It just is. Was it weird for you in Maine?
So I noticed the difference. I lived in Massachusetts for 10 years, so a couple states away. That was so much easier. I could go to like 6 comic book stores on a Saturday. Like my ex-wife, I got remarried, but my ex-wife, she would go work on Saturday, and I'd drive around and trying to look for comic books. I could go to like 6 or 7 stores within a 30-minute, 45-minute drive from my house in Massachusetts. And up here, it's like I have my store in Bangor, Maine, which is this town next to where I live, and then like 40 minutes away is another one. There's a couple in Portland, Maine, which are 2 hours away, but there's like not a lot. So it's like the hunt for a comic book has really gone away in that aspect. Like if they don't have it at the local comic book shop and they can't order it, I've got to order it online. And so there's that, and plus, like I've always, as you mentioned on your podcast too, like I've always wanted to be the guy who like walked up to a yard sale and like flipped through comic books and found that gem. And it's harder here because there hasn't been comic book shops around. Like the fact I don't think anybody has long boxes from years ago up here because there just wasn't a place to buy them at the time. I mean, I guess back in the day you could buy them at newsstands and things, but like I just feel like there isn't that big fan. The 6,000 people that came to that Comic-Con this weekend, I mean, majority of them probably came from the southern part of the state, and more of them probably in the past had come from Canada. The border's closed right now, so they couldn't. But like, there wasn't many from this direct area. I mean, it's only 1.3 million people in the state, and in the area that I'm in, there's only like 100,000 of those people. So it's like it's harder to find buyers for the comic books. So I understand why there wouldn't be that many comic book stores open.
Yeah. I will say your population is twice ours, and we're really far away. And I've seen crazy collections in Alaska. There are collections there. You can, whether or not you can find them for sale is an entirely different story. But I don't know. I mean, there's always opportunities. I find gems from time to time in like really random places. It's just you just got to be relentless in looking. But yeah, I mean, we only when I was growing up, there was 3 versions of the same shop, Bosco's Comics, and then there was another shop called A1, which I'm pretty sure was like a front for something, but it was not selling comics. Either that or they're just really bad at business. I don't know what, but it was a really weird place. Actually, you would have loved it because they had all their variants were regular price, and they ordered so much that they had like 1 million copies of every Scotty Young cover. And I remember my friend would go there and he'd just buy all the Scotty Young covers for his son at like cover price, and as our regular shop would charge a lot more than that, but it's because they were in a weird front for something. But yeah, I don't know, it's interesting growing up in a place like this, but I think there's advantages too, and I like to think that it made me a better, different fan than I would have been otherwise.
Yes. Absolutely. And you talked to Christina from Lunar recently on your podcast too about Lunar and discount comic book services and all that stuff. She makes it easier for a lot of us that maybe can't get that. So there's another option for me. I mean, there's the Midtown Comics also as an option. All these other websites.
I mean, a lot of shops have online stores now. Like when my shop is sold out of something I want, the 2 closest shops that I order from are Cape and Cowl Comics in Oakland. And then there's also, I think, is it Current Comics that's in Monterey, California? And I apologize if I messed that up. But anyways, I order from them because they're close, and they have Comic Hub, which is a POS system that I can just order off of their site, and it's super easy. And I get the comics a few days later, and they're great shape. And I've ordered so much from Cape and Cowl that they've sent me presents, and it's pretty great. I love it. I mean, it's the idea of what can be your comic shop or having any geo lock to what your comic shop could be is kind of gone now. It's amazing. I've gotten comics from Ireland. It's ridiculous.
I tried to order comics from Ireland because there's a Scotty Young cover that what's his face says over at you've had him on Big Bang that I wanted to get, but I couldn't get it to send to the United States at the time.
Oh, so, yeah, pandemic.
It's crazy, but I mean, it's made it easier, but it's also like if you're a person, you have a comic book shop within distance of you that you can actually go to, and they have the comic book in stock, go buy it there. Like, let's be honest, people, like all these people that I know that are like, oh, I just bought it online. I bought it on eBay. I'm like, the dude downtown has it. Like, why wouldn't you just go get it right there? It's right there, and it's the same price, and you don't have to pay shipping. And it's like, yeah, but it was easier. I'm like, yeah, but they need the money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always buy. I'm a Wednesday warrior through and through, and I just go to my shop, and if it doesn't work out, then I go somewhere else.
I mean, so it's talking about being a rural comic book fan. Like I said, rural. It's not like it's not like we're living in the middle of the backwoods.
There's like 290,000 people in my city.
Exactly. So it's not rural, but I'm thinking rural compared to like some of these other places that there are comic book fans. But so you're talking about being a fan there, but what about being a basketball or sports fan and being a comic book fan? I feel like there isn't, like, I don't have, like, I have fans, I have friends that are like one or the other. So I can talk to one of them about comic books or pop culture or movies. And then there's the other one that just wants to talk sports and has no idea what's going on in the comic book world. There are very few friends that I have, maybe one or two, that I can actually have the conversation about both. And when I started listening to your podcast and you jumped into sports, I was like, oh my gosh, this is definitely my realm right here. You're talking basketball and you just talked about Spider-Man. What the hell's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's not too surprising that there's not a lot of overlap,
No.
if only because comic fandom is still pretty niche. I mean, like, watching the movies is completely different than watching or reading the comics, and so it's pretty nichey. So it's a smaller audience, anyways. There was always, like, when I was growing up, I mean, it's like what you said, it wasn't cool, and that's changed. But at the same time, when we were growing up, it was like, I think a lot of times people who read comics were nerds, and that was like kind of made them a target. And I think there might have been a natural resistance formed towards sports because of it. I mean, not all sports. Wrestling is immensely popular with comic fans. And I think it's because comic or wrestling is effectively live action comics. It's completely that. I don't actually watch wrestling, but I know enough about it to understand that it's basically the same drama. But yeah, I don't know. I grew up loving sports. I actually collected sports cards before I collected comics. And that's why I said the trading cards were a big gateway for me, because I loved cards. I just wanted more and more cards, and I was a huge fan of sports in general. The funny thing though is and this might not be as true for you because you have a lot of teams that are kind of like the New England Patriots are New England's team. Hilariously, I'm a New England Patriots fan. I'm a fan of the Patriots, Indiana Pacers, and Seattle Mariners. Seattle Mariners because I first became a baseball fan when Ken Griffey Jr. was a rookie, and then on top of that, it's the closest team. Like, most people in Alaska are regional fans who are fans of like the Blazers or the Mariners or the Seahawks. The Patriots because my dad is from a town that's close to where Drew Bledsoe was from, and he was like, "You're a fan of this guy now," and he gave me Drew Bledsoe's 1993 SP rookie, and I was like, "I am a fan of this guy now," and I became a Patriots fan because of that. And Drew Bledsoe left, and I'm still a Patriots fan. And then the Pacers, I watched them on TV, and I saw Reggie Miller score 25 points in the fourth quarter against against the Knicks, and flash a choke sign at Spike Lee. And I was like, this is my guy. I love this guy. He's amazing. And yeah, those are my teams. And I've been a fan of them ever since. I haven't seen the Patriots in New England. I've seen them once in Seattle. I actually don't really like watching football live. I've seen the Patriots or the Pacers a lot. I've seen them in Indiana. I've seen them in a number of other cities. I used pre-pandemic, I would fly down to go watch them play in Portland every single year, which means that I've watched them lose in Portland a lot of times. I've actually never seen the Pacers win, which is incredible because I've seen them like 9 times now. And it's not even that they're bad. And the Mariners, like, I've seen them a ton of times, but they haven't made the playoffs in 20 years. So it's problematic, but I don't know. I mean, like, it's all fandom, right? Like, should there really be a big separation between these things? It's like wearing a jersey to a game is just like sports fan cosplay. Being really into like the statistics and all the stuff like that is just like being into the lore of comics. There's not a huge difference. I think that it's just some people value things differently, and that's fine. But I am a little surprised that there aren't more fans of both. And maybe that's a generational thing, and maybe that's changing. I don't know. Maybe people who are reading Wayne Family Adventures on Webtoon are like crazy huge fans of like esports or something. I don't know.
And that's obviously the next thing is esports too. Like what classifies as a sport to some people. But I don't know. I grew up like trying to have different hobbies and things like that. And so comic books was there, and I collected Pokemon cards at one point and basketball cards. And I just, as I got older and got to the point where I was like in my 30s, I was like, there's 2 things that stuck around. It was comic books and sports, and mainly basketball, baseball. But before I moved back to the Maine, I lived in Massachusetts for 10 years. My career, or my stardom in media, was covering sports. I was a sports writer in Massachusetts. And so when I was down there, I covered college hockey and the Bruins and the UFC and PGA Tour. And it was a lot of fun to do that. And it was cool to meet those people and stuff, do all that stuff. And that's, I think, why it stuck around with me. I don't know why as much there isn't a lot more. I think, I don't know, cool. Like I said, back in the day, cool people like sports and nerds like the comic books. And I think it's just some people have stuck with that over the years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like when you're growing up, it's like the thing that you love often continues being the thing that you love, whether it's sports or it's comics or it's like baking or whatever. I don't know. It's a lot of the things that our foundational things continue to be things that we love because they formed our foundation. It makes sense.
It does.
I mean,
and so are you happy now that the Celtics didn't trade to the Indiana Pacers for like Gordon Hayward for Miles Turner and
yes.
TJ? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm not happy.
it probably would have made the Pacers better, and it probably would have made the Celtics better. But I love Miles Turner. He is my favorite Pacer. I think that there is great untapped potential in him, and he's been misused for his entire career. And I think that if you put him on somebody like the Celtics, that he'd be amazing. That said, I think Time Lord is fantastic. Robert Williams is going to be really good. And I think that it's not going to be necessarily a huge loss for you guys because I think Time Lord will be, I don't know. I mean, I think personally, I think that Miles has a higher ceiling because of the shooting, but Time Lord's a good playmaker, like very underrated passer. I think they really discovered that last year. I really hope he starts. From what I heard, it's going to be Marcus Smart, it's going to be Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, shocking, and then probably Al Horford and Time Lord. And I like how I refer to him as Time Lord, Robert Williams, and that makes sense to me. That's a good lineup, and so I don't think it's a big loss for you guys. So I'm not unhappy about it at all. I was not excited about paying Gordon Hayward 25 plus million, but at the same time, we're in a league where it's dominated by wings and the Pacers play two bigs. And that's problematic because it's always going to neuter one of them to a certain degree, even if Miles is a modern big and Domantas Sabonis is a facilitator big. At the same time, they eat up the same space and it makes defense a lot harder. So I'm going to say it's complicated. Yes, I love my team. I love my team. We're a cursed team. I mean, Karis LeVert has like a stress fracture in his back. TJ Warren will never be healthy again for the rest of his life. And we'll still be exactly as good as we always are. And Rick Carlisle's our coach again, will probably be better than that. The Pacers are perpetually better than they should be, but never great. And that is the life I lead, and I'm fine with it. I watch almost every single game of the Pacers play.
I see, and that's the thing is over the past couple of years, I got really back into basketball to the point where I was watching a lot of it. I missed the bubble. The bubble was freaking amazing. I loved watching basketball in the bubble.
It was great basketball.
It was great basketball. It was like no one had home court advantage. It was just like people were happy to play, and those who weren't happy to play and didn't want to play didn't. And I just felt like it was like that's what I wanted to watch for the rest of my life was bubble basketball. And I wish they had done it in 2021 or 20 into 21. But so here's some predictions. So where does Ben Simmons end up? And who's winning the championship?
Championship's the Nets. Okay. It's really easy. I mean, unless Kyrie sits out the season and they get hurt again. Although, I mean, their free agent pickup, that team is stacked. Yeah. I mean, like Patty Mills is like their fourth guard, and Patty Mills is great. Like he literally like was carrying Australia. Did they win the silver? I don't remember. They did really well.
Yes.
So that team is stacked. It's unless things go wrong, I don't see how the Nets don't win. To me, it's probably the Bucks second. And I think the underrated part of this is I actually just read Miran Fader's biography of Giannis, which is great. I highly recommend reading that if for sports fans out there. But the underrated storyline of this season is if Giannis comes back and is considerably better than he was last year when he's already one of the best players in basketball, I would not be surprised, like at all. I think that Giannis is going to continue to get better. And at a certain point, that's tough to deny. I don't think, honestly, it's weird. It's like, I'm kind of down on the West. I don't think most of the teams in the West have a chance unless like the freak experiment that is Russell Westbrook on the Los Angeles Lakers turns out to be like amazing. But and I actually like Russell Westbrook. So yeah, I don't see The only teams that I think can beat the current top East teams in reality would be the Clippers if Kawhi gets fully healthy, or the Nuggets if Jamal Murray gets fully healthy. And those are big ass. Oh, okay. And like outlier if Clay is somehow completely healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big one. I love LeBron and I think AD is amazing, but that team is so weird. And I just don't know how they're going to beat the Nets or the Bucks. But I could be proven wrong. So anyways, needless to say, the Pacers are not winning it. Where does
nor the Celtics?
Yeah, exactly. They got a shot to be a little bit. They got a lot of depth. I bet if you told me I had to choose between them in the play-in or them as a top 4 seed, I would choose top 4 seed.
Yes, but they're also the kind of team that all of a sudden I know where you can just like see halfway through the season they're at the bottom of the standings. Like it just seems like something could go wrong. And
I don't know. Tatum and Brown are too good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like they got a lot of depth, but who ends up with Ben Simmons? I think the right answer is probably somebody like Minnesota, but it's weird. Like they're not even on the table, but I could 100% see the Raptors trading for him. It makes no sense, but they got the contracts. I mean, let's say that they're not really happy with Siakam after last year. Trade Siakam and like, I don't know, Gary Trent Jr. for him and like a first. And that's probably not enough, but that's pretty interesting. Like if you're the Sixers and you can get a shooter like Trent and you can get Siakam as the new 4, who's a guy that like, he's certainly not shy about shooting. So you're not gonna have the same problems as Simmons. I think that definitely locks them in as a top 4 seed when right now that they're like a top 6 seed, but I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know that team isn't better. I don't know if the Raptors would do that, but Masai Ujiri, I could see him doing something like that just because he's always looking for angles. And he did it with Kawhi. Ben Simmons is no Kawhi, but at the same time, if anybody's going to lock him, I could see Nick Nurse and that team doing it. So I'm going to say the Timberwolves are probably the most likely because they're the most incentivized to do so. The only question is whether or not they're not going to trade Anthony Edwards or Cat. No. So that makes it problematic. But I mean, eventually the Sixers, I mean, like, I feel like they say that he's got 4 years left on their contract, so the Sixers can play a waiting game, but are they really going to sacrifice an entire year just for this? I don't think so. I think eventually they're going to take a deal.
But who knows? It's the freaking Sixers.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they should just be stubborn the whole time and just be like, we're not going to do it until the right deal comes on the table. And at this point, his stock just goes down and down and down because he knows he's not going to play for the Sixers. Like he knows he's not going to suit up there. At some point, they have to get rid of him. They're not going to pay him or have him on the team for 4 years and not trade him.
So, a question for you: you're a basketball fan. Would you rather have let's say 2 hypothetical trades? I think 2 of the most likely trade partners are that. Okay, let's say 3. 3 of the most likely trade partners are the Wolves, the Blazers, and the Kings. So, would you rather have D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, who I'm pretty sure averaged 20 points a game last year. And then contract filler, assorted firsts. Blazers with CJ McCollum. And like, let's say Robert Covington. And that'd be hilarious. Covington got traded back to the Sixers. Exactly. And then like contract filler to number firsts. Or like Buddy Hield and Tyrese Halliburton, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather have McCollum.
Yeah, I think that because he's also like proven and he's doesn't have to be a number 1, and that's the thing why the Toronto trade actually works too with Siakam. Is Siakam I don't think can be a number 1. I don't think he's too streaky to be number 1, and
because
so he could be
Embiid's the number 1.
Correct, but so Embiid would be the number 1, and that way it would work for Siakam too. It would he could probably do better, and McCollum is a number 2 really, so he doesn't have to be a number 1 either.
He doesn't even have to be the number 2. They got Tobias Harris.
Correct. And so I think that, I don't know. I just don't know what the Sixers even think. I mean, the Sixers whole thing it bothers me. And I don't know. Being an East team, seeing this, I laugh at them. Like just watching them stumble around, trying to figure out how the hell do. And then Doc Rivers. I like Doc Rivers. I didn't have a problem with Doc Rivers, but just seeing him, struggling to coach at some points it was just funny to watch. So
yeah, clearly I could talk about basketball forever. I mean, honestly, like I always tell people that I'm actually a much bigger basketball fan than I'm a comics fan. And It is not. I don't think it's close, sadly, for comics. I apologize, comics.
Yes, but I mean, the funny thing is, the difference that I always see is that basketball is real and comics aren't. So there's this things that actually we're not going to see Spider-Man get traded to the freaking DC universe for Batman and stuff like that. Like these are fun things. These guessing games that if you and I just speculated about what could happen in an X-Men comic book, someone could hear it, and all of a sudden 5 years from now, 2 years from now, someone puts it in a comic book. None of this trade talk we're talking about, any NBA executive's going to be like, oh, well, Justin and David on the podcast said, we should do this.
I don't know.
So, I don't know. You
Jerry, call me.
Yeah, advisor
of the Toronto Raptors, long distance. Hey, Anchorage did have a person that was hired to the Milwaukee Bucks as one of their analytics guys. So the line has been drawn between the NBA and Anchorage, Alaska. There we go.
There you go. Done right there. And so when Supersonics need to come back too, right?
No. I mean, the Sonics, it'd be nice if they came back, but it wouldn't change my fandom. I think that they should get a team. I think it should come through expansion. I don't want a team to move. No. I just think it sucks when they move teams. And it's like the NBA. I don't really think the NBA has like an attendance problem in the same way that like you look at baseball and it's like the Oakland A's have like 4,000 people going to September games. And that's sad. I mean, frankly, I think the A's should move. And yeah, I don't know. It's you can't blame the pandemic because nobody's ever went to their games.
No. Well, that's the Seattle set up for it now too, with the Kraken being there now too. There's infrastructure in place for them to be there too. So maybe one of these days we'll see that.
Vegas and Seattle, do that. Move like Houston to the Eastern Conference. Bounce it out. Boom. Actually, you know what? Screw you, Masai Ujiri. Call me Adam Silver. I'll work for you too.
Awesome. So this has been fun. So I love talking comics. Obviously, I love talking basketball. It's a lot of fun. I love when you have that balance on yours too. When you have certain people on and you start talking about things, it's great because it kind of mixes it up a little bit too. You obviously talk comic books for a living, in a sense, not a living because you have another job too. But and so talking basketball is also a lot of fun because it's a passion.
I will say the guest that I've most wanted on my show that I've never booked, and I got close to it at one point. I actually had my people, who is me, reach out to his people, who at that time was the Milwaukee Bucks. I tried to get Robin Lopez, and I really want Robin Lopez on my podcast. Anyways, because he's a comic fan, and also because I love his attacking of the mascots, and he's just a funny dude. I would love to have him on the podcast, and it's funny how that works out.
I bet a free-flowing conversation with Robin Lopez would be amazing.
Also, very deep voice, and insanely deep voice.
Easy editing.
Yeah, exactly.
But so Slice Fried Gold on Twitter is your personal Twitter. Oh, first of all, Facebook went down today. Did you see that?
I did. Yeah. And
everybody
actually makes my life a little easier actually, because my day job is in digital marketing. I'm like, I can't get on Facebook, so I can't do my job.
But everybody, I love how Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp goes down. Everybody flocks to Twitter to see if they're down. That's my favorite thing. Twitter's users go way up when Facebook's down, not because they're using that as another platform. They're going there to look to see if Facebook's down. That's so smartest thing they'll ever do is that Twitter's servers will be on different servers than Facebook, just so they're never down at the same time. Servers goes down. But yeah, at Slice Fried Gold is your Twitter, and you are at Sketched Comic.
Yep, at Sketch Comic.
No vowels.
No vowels. No vowels. SKTCHD, and comic actually has all the vowels. And then on Instagram, I'm also at Sketch Comic and at Slice Fried Gold. I don't know why you'd want to follow me there though, because it'd just be cat pictures. And then Off Panel has a Patreon. Off Panel, patreon.com/Off Panel. And Sketched is a subscription site, so it's sketch.com. Check out subscriptions. Always got cool pieces in the hopper. This year has had a lot of big features, like a oral history of Secret Wars, a lot of industry stuff. Some really great interviews with amazing creators like James Tynan IV and Mike Del Mundo. When is this running?
This is what we're on the 5th. We're on the 4th, so it will not be this Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that. So
okay. Well, the week this drops, I'll have Jonathan Hickman on the podcast, and so a lot of people listen to that. But if you want to listen to that, you can check it out on Apple Podcasts, and that's where I'm at. That's great. It's awesome. It's guys, anybody listening right now, it's definitely one of those things. And I shout out other podcasts all the time because that's the way the world works. You can't only listen to one podcast. No episodes. There's not enough episodes for people to listen to one podcast. Listen to multiple ones. Off Panel's amazing. I listen to it every week. Love it. It's great conversations. People are fun that you talk to. You don't get boring people on. I try not to. And you have various different
topics. So you're not just talking to cartoonists or artists. You're not just talking to writers. You're not just talking to, you're talking to publishers. You're talking to distributors and comic book shops and any of the likes. And I love that all aspects of it is pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to get your head really big. That was my plan. I hope it worked.
Finally, my wife will finally be like, finally, he has an ego. Nope.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on and talking and hanging out for a bit. And we'll catch up at some point and do another one at some point down the road and see where you are at the time. But stay warm in Alaska.
I will. Thank you.
It's here. So
you too in Maine.
Yeah, I'm trying.